The crimes, the criminals, why did they do it? Who got hurt? Did they meet justice or commit the perfect crime? You'll find all the clues at Jim Harold's Crime Scene. Welcome to the Crime Scene. I am Jim Harold. So glad to be with you once again. And today we have a fellow host join us because he is also an author. And we're going to talk about one of those cases where I guess you would say it's like the last person you would have suspected. And I think in so many of these kind of serial killer cases, it's interesting because it's always the quiet guy or the upstanding citizen in this case. And it turns out to be something far, far more sinister. Our guest today is Alan R. Warren. He is the author of the new book, Above Suspicion, the true story of serial killer Russell Williams. And he is also the host of the popular true crime history show, House of Mystery, heard in Seattle, KKNW, 1150 AM, and syndicated throughout the U.S. and Canada. And you can also hear the show in many different places, from iTunes, YouTube, TuneIn, Stitcher Radio, iHeartMedia, Spreaker, Podbay, Podomatic, and too many to mention, at somethingweirdmedia.com/house-of-mystery. Alan R. Warren, welcome to the program today.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Now, this particular case, talk to us about Russell Williams. To the outside world, before any of this happened, who was Russell Williams?
Well, to the outside world, he was a upstanding military officer. He worked his way through the ranks, and he became in charge of Trent Air Force Base in Canada, which is kind of the center of all military action. So people going out to countries at war and coming back in, it sort of was the center of where people came and went.
So one of these guys who was a rock-ribbed citizen and was considered generally a stand-up guy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I like I said, and they actually, he had passed so many barriers and went through so many tests. He had the highest clearance possible for an officer. And they had him flying Queen of England, Prince, all the dignitaries from all around the world. He had a huge responsibility, and he was totally, as I would call him, above suspicion. That's why I kind of went that way with the title.
Sure. Now, talk to us about the area that he was from and some of the strange things that started to happen.
Well, originally, he was in the Toronto area, just in the suburbs. And then he met who became his wife, and they bought a place in the suburbs of Ottawa, which is the capital, and lived in an upper mid-class neighborhood. They were both making good salaries, and was really kind of real friendly with all the neighbors. They all liked him and his wife. They'd have coffee with him all the time. He was a complete gentleman, and would always hold the door open, get up when a lady enters the room, and pull the chair back for them. He was very good manners, and the neighbors really, really liked him. But being that he had to go to the Air Force Base, he decided to buy a second place in Tweed, which is a little town a couple hours away from Ottawa, but it's really close to where he was working at the base. So Monday to Friday, he would stay out at Tweed, and the weekend he would be back home in Ottawa with his wife.
And some strange things started to happen in Tweed, didn't they?
Oh, actually, they started happening in Ottawa, and nobody put it together till later. So what happened was, first of all, things were going missing. People would come home, and things were missing in their house, or they seemed out of place. And they would call the police, do a report. But the strange thing, it was nothing valuable. So actually, out of all the crimes, out of all the break-ins, only about 15% were being reported at that time. One is probably because it was done so well. There was no sign of break-in or The locks weren't tampered with. There was no damage in the house. Quite often people would come home and not notice it. And it wasn't until after the fact that they started to put it all together, and other people started saying, yeah, this was missing. And the problem is, why a lot of people didn't report is that they would come home and their children, or like teenagers, like 10, 11, 12, that age, would be missing clothes. And quite a few of the comments like I got from the parents at the time were, they would say, well, the teenager would come down and say, oh, all my underwear's gone and all my shorts are gone. Yeah, and the thing is, the parents would go, yeah, did you check the floor? You look in the laundry basket, They're kind of like, teenagers. And it wasn't a real thing at first. And when some people did notice it, like a whole drawer of the clothing would be gone. Like they would, there was the next door neighbors came home, and everything in their 12-year-old girl's dresser drawer was gone. Horrible. So they made a report, but there was very few like that. And then it started getting a little bit stranger, because then some people would come home, and the wife of the house, her stuff would be gone through, and she would be missing everything from, her vibrator to undergarments to a dress to shoes. Like it became more and more. So a little bit of fear started coming into people then.
And it sounds like there may have been an escalation here, and then eventually from stealing items to going further and with physical consequences.
Yeah, it kind of got strange. We can't really know why or what made him go the extra step, but he started to. And what he started doing was he'd get up in the morning and run around do a little jog around the neighborhood. And he did that all the time and then go to work. But what he was doing was casing out people and I guess looking for a victim. And when he would find someone that he was interested in, he would get to know their routine, when they would come, when they would go, and kind of just what they were doing. And so he would make an effort to first break into their house and go through the house and see who else was living there. So, he'd go to the bathroom and he'd go through the bedrooms to make sure there was no men in the house. Ugh. See, that was his, he wanted to make sure he didn't have any problems when he did break in. So he would do all of that and then go back home and then maybe give it a week or two and sort of decide when he was going to make his move.
And this whole time, he was continuing on his duties and seemed to be, a true blue upstanding citizen. Yeah,
and the strange thing was he would meet with the CIC. This is kind of like Canada's version of CIA. And because he was doing, he was taking the Minister of Defense around in a plane throughout Canada and the U.S., and so he had to meet with different intelligence agencies. And the first woman that he actually attacked and in her house and had her, and eventually, raped her and beat her and all that and killed her, that same morning, just when he finished off, he would shower and he had to go meet the CIC for his interview before he was taking someone, important, some dignitary somewhere. So, and even when you interview those people, they said he was completely normal. He would have just spent 10 hours raping and killing someone and then come in for his meeting with the intelligence agents, and they said, yeah, he was very normal. He wasn't aggravated. He wasn't upset. He was, they give him top ratings. So he was a true sociopath. He had no feeling for anything he was doing. It didn't affect him.
And that's interesting because, your average garden variety, I hate to use that, I don't want to minimize it, but serial killer is, maybe works at a retail place, maybe they're jobless, maybe they live at home with their parents. Certainly not someone that's being checked out by the Canadian equivalent of the Central Intelligence Agency. And I would assume if you're going to be flying around the Queen of England, princes, dignitaries, politicians, those kind of people, supposedly you would have a very robust going over, wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah. That's the hardest thing. Even the guy that approved him for the command of Trenton Air Force Base, even in the interview I did with him, he still does not know how he passed. He cannot figure out how they had no signs of this at all. But I will follow that up by saying I was doing interviews with people like that have written books and done research, and some doctors and psychiatrists and stuff, and I wanted to find out how this could happen. Like, how could the top people not, even catch on to something? And most of them told me that that's because their interviewing process was all built on criminals. They developed all of these intelligence, let's say, questionnaires that they give people out of people that were in jail. So it's kind of basically they were saying it's not that hard to pass. Like, they'll ask questions like, have you ever hurt an animal? Things that you could easily say, well, no, and get through. So, I'm just not sure how strong those tests were.
Well, it strikes me that if you think about it, you would assume that they would have tests designed to pick out someone who is maybe being surreptitious and maybe trying to hide their mental illness or kind of, in this case, depravity. But I guess they just weren't that sophisticated. Now, how many victims do we know about?
Well, you see, this is another problem. As with a lot of serial killers, we don't really know. And we know for sure 4. And he was convicted of 82 break-and-enters of where he stole things from people's houses. But we don't know how many victims. The reason is, at the same time that he was going about his killing and raping spree, there was Paul Bernardo. And Paul Bernardo was in Toronto as well, and he was known as the Scarborough Rapist. He was doing much the same thing with these women, and he was convicted as well. But what happened is now they're blaming bodies on each other, and we don't know who did what. And it's really tricky because you say, well, how can that be? Well, what they did was they would blindfold their victim. They would attack them, blindfold them, and then keep them tied up. For instance, Russell Williams would tie them to a chair, and they'd be blindfolded, and he would torture them. And I say that because he did, everything from beating to raping to a lot of bad things over a period of hours and sometimes days before he would kill them or let them go. So the ones that did go, like got escaped, only heard his voice. And so this was, you don't know who was who because they were both doing the same thing. And one other tie-in, now this is the strangest thing, and is that they were both taking classes in economics in the University of Toronto. Both Paul Bernardo and Russell Williams were in the same class at the same time for that year.
Wow, that's strange.
Isn't that strange?
Is there any common theme? Any thought that there was some, I don't, and sometimes they say these things are spurred by abuse from an adult. Were there any common people that could have, is there any thought like that?
No. And the thing is, there's reports that they knew each other and they were friends, but all of Russell Williams' friends that he did hang out with on a fairly regular basis said they never knew Paul. They were in the same class and that was it. And when you look at Russell Williams' background, I thought for sure, because what he did was, if I can describe this now, was he would go into the basement, like the first person he did. He was in the basement. He waited, and when she came down to get her cat, he attacked her, and then he blindfolded her, and he hung her up on a hook in the downstairs.
God.
Yeah, so she was hanging from a hook, tied up. But then what he would do was he would take all of their clothes off, and he would take them up to the bedroom, and he set up a tripod and a camcorder, and he would film the whole event. And so he would have them tied, and he would wear their clothing. So he would put on their clothes, and then he would do something to them and film it. And then he would take that off, and then he would put on some other clothing of theirs and do something else. And this would go on for a whole period. So he had this real fetish of wearing their clothes. Some places he would take 75, 80 pictures of one pair of underwear, as well as filming while he did all this stuff. And then he would take them, throw them in the shower, take them back, and keep doing this. So for me, I thought, okay, well, he was punishing these women. He was, in fact, I can tell you, the first two he didn't even have sexual contact with. He just degraded them, and he still wore their clothes and beat them and tortured them, but didn't have sex with them and didn't kill them. So to me, I thought, well, he's torturing these people. He does not like females. He does not like women. And but the psychiatrist that evaluated him said to me that no, he's a true sociopath. He doesn't feel. So when he was a child, he learned to mimic this behavior. He learned it from, now this is really going to throw you. His father wore women's clothing and would beat his mother. And he learned that behavior from very young. And so for some reason, he mimicked that behavior, and as he got older, it became alive. It became something he started doing on a regular basis, and he had to have it. And in fact, every time he got promoted and went through a more, let's say, stressful job, his theft and his violence would increase. He would do more and more often. So it just sort of kind of got out of hand.
Now, in terms of his attitude, it's my understanding he confessed. What was his attitude? I assume no remorse whatsoever?
No, none at all. And in fact, he only confessed to make a bargain. That was really it. They were in the interview for 10 hours. I've covered that quite a bit. And what they did was even when they asked him, how did you choose the woman? Like, what was it? He's like, well, I don't know any of them. I didn't care. It was just, there's just nothing. There's just no feeling. There's no, oh yeah. It was the strangest reaction for him. It was just. Now I'll tell you why this is a strange thing. They plea bargained because in the 800 garments that they found, and of the thousands of pictures and hours of videos that they had, there were 45 young girls' clothes, like 12, 10. And the very first victim, we think, was a minor. And the reason I say that is because after the confession, or after the plea bargain, they asked him to write apology letters to the families. And the reason the police do this, and I didn't realize that, was because it was after they get a confession or an agreement, it kind of solidifies what they've done. It kind of, in case they decide to take it back or say, try to fight it, false confession or something. So they try to get them to write letters. And so they asked him to write letters. And on the first victim, he wrote a couple of letters. And one, he kept on saying, sorry for what I did. And I know you'll grow up to be something really good one day. And in Canada, they're not allowed to give the name of minors. And that name was never released. So I have a feeling that the first one was a minor. And because of all the children's, like he would take their clothes, like their dresses, their shoes, their panties, and their nightgowns. And in fact, with his very next door neighbor, the Murdochs, he broke in 3 times when they went away to a funeral. And what he would do was set up the tripod in the 12-year-old girl's room, and he would get naked and lay on her bed, and he would have her clothes, and he would, masturbate and do things and film it for hours. So what they did was they decided to keep all pedophile out of the public to protect the military.
Well, I gotta tell you, it's so disturbing, and the thing that is in one of the most disturbing things. There's so many disturbing things, but the thought that people like this can live amongst us, and in a case like this, be some of our most trusted citizens. You kind of think, well, somebody that does this, there's signs they don't have their life together. They're 35 years old and they're living in their parents' basement, and always been like I hate to use the word, but a misfit, a social misfit, something like that. But this is a case where somebody who is among the most trusted is this. So I guess I have 2 questions, because it's very hard to do an interview like this because you almost feel hopeless. It's kind of like there's no lesson to be learned except there were some really bad people out there, and to be careful. That's certainly a lesson. But I mean, I guess I would start with the first question. Is there any way whatsoever to prevent the creation of more Russell Williams? Is there anything that we can do? I'm in the U.S., you're up in Canada, this was up in Canada. So is there anything as a society that we can do to prevent this happening again? That's my first question.
I don't know how. I don't know what people could do. Again, because this man he was the epitome of everything. He acted and behaved. Nobody could understand it. He's the guy that the next door neighbors, they had coffee on their patio all the time. They'd come over, talk about stuff in the neighborhood. He was polite. All the neighbors liked him. Everybody trusted him so much that everybody in the neighborhood would give him keys when they went away for 2 weeks. Take care of my place.
Oh my gosh.
There was not a thing. What would there be to suspect? Because he's got a very respectable job. He does it well. His wife, by the way, was the executive CEO for Heart and Stroke Foundation Canada.
Oh my.
So she had a very good job as well. They were both very well respected. They both did things to service the country, like, military and Heart and Stroke Foundation. What more could you ask for? And not only that, they were very polite, very nice. They kept their house really clean. Everything was, there was nothing that would make you even think that there was something wrong with either one of them. And,
was there any indication that the wife knew about this?
Oh, you see, and that's a whole other twist. It's because when they did catch him finally, they got a search warrant for their house. So they go to the house and you give her the search warrant, and she has to leave, and so she leaves. And they do the complete search, and all through the house, and I have that listed, they found bags and bags, like there would be a duffel bag, for instance, and it would be full of undergarments and pictures and things from that person. So what he was doing was he was collecting bags of clothing from people, and if there were ones that he assaulted, he took pictures and did things to them, and he would put them in his bag so he could relive, I guess, that attack whenever he felt like it. So these bags were scattered all throughout. You got to remember, he had over 800 garments. He had 12 vibrators. He had hundreds and hundreds of pictures, hours and hours of video. So they were all over the place. They would be on a counter in the laundry room. They would be on the floor. They were in the living room by the piano. They were in the bedroom. They were throughout the whole house. So, when you look at that, either she knew or he certainly wasn't scared if she would find it, right? Could you imagine that? If you're at home right now and you go to any room and open a cupboard, or sitting on the floor is a duffel bag full of undergarments and pictures. Like that, wouldn't that make you kind of go, what? It makes no sense that she didn't know.
It seems strange.
Like how, they shared one Mac laptop, and he had all of the film that he took and all of the pictures put onto the laptop, and they were all shortcutted and organized in files on the desktop.
Was she charged with anything or found as an accomplice in any way? Has there been any action against her?
Well, there's been action. They did not prosecute her, but the families of the victims and some of the victims sued her. And it went all the way to the version of Canadian Supreme Court, where they decided that she could be held responsible. And so she settled out of court just in November of 2016 for all of the different lawsuits. We don't know the amounts because that's kept, quiet. But she did settle all of them. And one of the lawsuits was for $7 million. Another one was for $2.5 million. They were quite hefty. And it does make her look bad because she didn't divorce him. And the second thing was all of his ownership of everything he sold to her for really pennies on the dollar, so that they couldn't get the money from him.
And, we firmly believe in innocent until proven guilty here, so I guess that'll have to remain an open question for further consideration. Now, the other question I was going to ask was this. I asked, how could you tell? And I guess you can't tell. And you started to preempt my next question here. I asked you, could we prevent it? And you said you didn't think so. And the second question was just that. I mean, a lot of times we're in situations where, you become friendly with people. You think you know them, whether it's through school or work or whatever it might be. You assume you know people. People have, to the public face, they do everything right. And then you find out, in rare cases, you have a monster like this. Any advice or telltale signs or anything that we should watch out for? Because, my goodness, you don't want to isolate yourself where you're not friendly with people, but it makes you think before you invite somebody over for dinner. Who am I really having over? So I guess, how do we strike that balance? Because that seems so tough.
Well, it is tough. And, I never thought about it too much until I'm working. I just finished another book that's gone in. And in that one, I talked to a lot of people that were more involved in serial killers one-on-one. I think it's kind of we deal with two problems. One is the person seems really nice, and we always like to judge people by the cover, right? So we're looking at, he's an officer, he's a gentleman, he's got all the things you think, and he's polite and nice, holds the door open. So why would you think he's a serial killer? But the other thing that we do quite often is when people do something weird or there's a weird behavior, we ignore it because we like the person, or we just don't, or it's maybe because we don't want to face something that we think about ourselves, or that we don't want to deal with it for some reason.
Yeah, we don't want to think ill of the person. We want to think the best of them.
Well, and I'll give you an example, you see, because, for instance, with Russell Williams, for instance, his other neighbor, Larry Jones, what he did was he actually set him up for the crime of the murders. And actually, he got arrested. This is quite the thing. Russell Williams went to his neighbor one day because his neighbor was retired and would go hunting all the time. And so he walked next door and said, "Hey, you're going hunting?" He said, "Yeah." And the neighbor thought, "Well, this is strange. I do this all the time. I have for years." And he goes, and then Russell Williams goes, "Well, what do you hunt?" And he's like, "Well, partridge. That's what's around here, And Russell goes, "Well, where did you set up your camp? Where do you go?" And so he told him. And then in his mind, he headed up to his camp, and he thought, well, that was weird. I'd been doing this for 10 years and known him, and he thought it was weird. So things like that we kind of ignore. And the reason that what had happened then, he goes hunting. Then he comes back, and someone has broke into this neighbor's garage. So he runs in there thinking, oh, God, he's got expensive machinery and tools in there. And none of that was gone. Instead, all that was missing was a pair of gloves, dirty old gloves, and a jacket that he used to just, it was so old, his dog would sleep on it while he worked in his shop. So he thought, why would someone steal that? Strange. What happened was Russell Williams found out where this guy would hunt, took those things out of his garage because it has his blood and fingerprints on it, and left it with the body he dumped right beside where he would go hunting. Right?
And here's, well, go ahead, finish your thought, because I have something to say.
I was just going to say, so that's exactly it. The last thing Larry Jones thought is, well, he's my neighbor for 10 years, great guy, we do coffee all the time, he's an officer, he flies the Queen, God, he's someone important, and he's always polite. The last thing you think was when that strange event occurred at the time, we don't go deeper because we don't want to know the answer. He didn't pursue Williams as in like, well, why are you asking that? Why do you want to know that? So he got set up, and actually the police ended up raiding the house, arresting him and his wife, going through everything. His name was soiled because even when they let him go, it never did recover. He never did. Even now, after Williams has been discovered and he did all this, and it still really wrecked his reputation. It wrecked his life.
The thing you said something there when Williams tried to set his neighbor up, that to me, and I'm sure it's not legally correct or technically correct, but when someone uses the defense, well, I'm mentally ill or I'm insane or those kind of things, and to me that goes out the window once you see a concerted effort, a sophisticated effort to try to cover something up. That tells me right from wrong, consequences, and yes, you may have some predilections based on maybe something horrible that happened to you, and maybe some people will think I'm unfair in saying this, but a lot of people think, oh, what if I murdered that person? They don't go out and do it. So my point is the fact that he covered it up so actively and so surreptitiously and so deliberately to me kind of throws out the window, well, this guy had to be crazy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And in fact, people like that are not crazy. The problem is in the mainstream and how we talk, what we define as crazy is different than what they do legally. And that's the big issue here because, and Canada and the U.S. are slightly different, but similar, that, you can say it was rage or he was insane at the time and that's why he did it. And then afterwards he discovered it. And so that's why he tried to cover it up. For us, just common people, we kind of go, oh, that's nuts. The guy should be locked away, right? He's not crazy, mentally crazy. It's just a really weird situation, and it's tough to deal with. And and as for grow up, we all grow up with things and challenges and problems, and come from homes that necessarily aren't the best or have broken homes, and certainly it doesn't turn us into this type of killer. This type of devious behavior where we're out just to hurt everybody, and it's really crazy, and I'll tell you, he came from, parents that were, that was another strange thing. His parents, he was born in England actually, and Russell Williams came over with his parents because his father worked for a nuclear plant. He was a specialist with metallurgist, and it was just so he had a good job. But his father and mother, it said they belonged to a swing club, so all the kids would be left in a house with a babysitter, and the parents would all get together and swing couples.
Yeah, I think that certainly probably had a role in this kind of twisted activity. Now, I've got to say, these are my least favorite shows to do in terms of the crime scene shows. You know, when we talk about historic cases and things, those are interesting. Or maybe we talked about recently Mrs. Sherlock Holmes, and a detective who was named, and a lot of that's interesting. Or Jack the Ripper, even though real people were killed. But things like this are just deeply, deeply disturbing. But I think it's important that people know, unfortunately, there are very real people out there today walking free who are like Williams, that may be very trusted, but yet very, very much not trustworthy. In fact, very, very much monsters. Alan R. Warren, I'm assuming people can get the book at Amazon and online and so forth?
Oh, yeah. It's in Amazon. It's in Barnes & Noble. And this month in Canada, it will be in Chapters and Indigo as well.
Very good. Well, the book is Above Suspicion, the true story of serial killer Russell Williams. Our guest has been Alan R. Warren. Alan, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you.
A cautionary tale. Sometimes those we respect the most and trust the most, they're the ones to be feared the most. Scary stuff. We'll talk to you next time on The Crime Scene, and as always, be careful out there. Bye-bye, everybody.